You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with author and historian Peter Frankopan and the Financial Times political journalist Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Our shining star, that's the lead headline in The Sun after the death of Girls Aloud singer Sarah Harding from cancer at the age of just 39. The Mirror also quotes her mum, "My beautiful girl Sarah, our bright, shining star." The Metro leads with the growing row over plans for tax rises to fund social care reform and the impact it could have on young people. While the Telegraph reports that 3 former chancellors have joined the criticism of the plan. That's also the lead in the Daily Mail, while The Guardian describes the growing unrest as nothing less than mutiny. Yet, according to The Times, the Prime Minister will defy them all and press ahead with his plans. The Financial Times leads with what's shaping up to be a record year for city mergers and acquisitions, almost $4 trillion worth of deals so far. So with me tonight, author and historian Peter Frankopan and the Financial Times' political journalist Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Metro and that story that I mentioned in the rundown of the papers there. The young to pay the price for social care, apparently. Peter.
To be able to fund social care in this
country.
Peter,
and the question is... just to say, we just missed the top of what you said there, so if you don't mind doing a take two.
Yeah, of course. So sorry. I think everybody realises that a large new contribution needs to come from somewhere. So the question is, where do we start in bailing out a shot-through economy? So I think we've got to think quite hard about that. Obviously, the pressure of putting tax on national insurance and raising tax is it passes disproportionately a cost onto young people. And the result of that is that 3 former chancellors are complaining in public now about the extent of where this rate comes from. First, it's a manifesto break, as Philip Hammond has pointed out, and that's a commitment that's been given by the Conservative Party at the last election. There have been mutterings to say, well, if a manifesto pledge is going to be broken, then maybe there should be yet another election. But clearly the challenge would be, how do you balance the books? And by taxing national insurance, which effectively is a tax on jobs, you suffocate the need and the ability to be creating jobs, particularly for younger workers, particularly for unskilled workers, where we should be incentivizing. So it seems that it's the wrong way around, and that revolt that the Prime Minister is said to be facing is going to be a standoff, perhaps to deflect some of the attention away from Afghanistan. But right now, I think it's about how economically literate and numerate is the government in being able to understand these really big macroeconomic problems. And I think the jury's out on that in terms of the handling of the last couple of years, but it's the principal challenge now to get the books starting to balance.
Meanwhile, Jasmine, we read that 3 former chancellors have been critical of the plan also.
Yeah, so Boris Johnson is under quite a lot of political pressure at the moment over this issue. So it's something that he pledged to fix when he became PM. But obviously with the pandemic, it's really exacerbated the focus on social care. We've got a situation where we've got an increasingly ageing population, but we've been slashing care funding. And so now the sector's really at a crunch point. And so Johnson's in quite a difficult position because it's clear that something needs to be done, but no one's clear on what the solutions are. And he's getting a lot of pushback from within his own party. There are some who are opposed to it on ideological terms. They don't believe the Conservatives should be increasing tax or national insurance. They don't like the idea of breaking a manifesto pledge. They think it sends a really bad message to the electorate that the party will break its promises. And then there are others who raise concerns about the fairness of the policy. Actually, should the cost fall on those who are younger, those who have fewer assets, such as houses, or those who are working age? And so there's a real tension between how you solve this, this huge crisis. And I think Johnson is going to have to convince not only backbenchers, but also the public that if it's going to be the case that there is an increase in national insurance, and so the costs are going to be moved on, from the individual to the taxpayer, then Johnson really needs to put forward an argument and put forward his case for that. And I do think overall we need to have, a public debate about social care. I think in contrast contrast to the NHS, for example, which is deeply ingrained in our social consciousness. We were saving the NHS, clapping for the NHS during the pandemic. I think most people don't really understand social care and only really come into contact with it if an elderly relative needs to use it. And so I think we need a radical overhaul as to how we think about this sector.
Peter, we hear tonight that the Prime Minister will be pushing ahead with his plans despite the opposition. How difficult a battle do you think he's got on his hands come Monday?
Well, Jasmine is exactly right that it's how to square the circle. You know, the problem is I'd have thought that the polling numbers will be telling Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party that older people tend to vote Conservative and younger people are more likely to be centre-left, and therefore they're not really a constituency that he's going to worry too much about. They turn up less often in elections. But the way in which the young have been hurt and hit by cuts at education, through with extra funding problems like the national insurance and other taxes, you know, it's a real battle for how this country gets united together. I mean, we're split and have been split for the last 5 or 6 years around Brexit, around Europe and not Europe. And I think this now between young and old becomes another issue alongside the North and South levelling up problem. So, you know, there are lots of these divisions. And the real question, I think, is Boris Johnson a prime minister who fundamentally can unite? Or is it that kind of Trumpian role of antagonized politics where you only bring along your own supporters and you don't really care what the other side do? And that is the sort of the zeitgeist in a lot of democracies right now, not just here in the UK. But you need, I think, as a prime minister to conciliate. You need to be able to offer fig leaves. You need to be able to listen to criticism and occasionally back down. And I think that the problem about any prime minister, probably like Boris Johnson at the moment, is if you feel that you're cornered, you know, that may not necessarily be the best way to make constructive decisions.
Jasmine, let's move on to the Telegraph and this story, which is going to be, I'm sure, I predict, a really, really tough talking point to do with the 12 to 15-year-olds and being vaccinated. Children as young as 12, we're told, will be able to overrule their parents if they object to them receiving the vaccine.
Yeah, so this is quite a sensitive topic because obviously the JCVI last week, they said that they weren't going to approve vaccinations for the vast majority of 12 to 15-year-olds, but they've left it to the chief medical officers. And so it's still sort of in flux. But there are these sort of practical questions about what happens if there is a mass rollout of the jab among, 12 to 15-year-olds and what role parental consent comes into that. And if there's a tension between what the child wants and, what the parent wants. And so it's actually quite a bit of a grey area. And in openly admitting that, the priority of the child could potentially override that of the parent, I think Zahawi's really opened up a can of worms because it's something that the government had been keen to stress, parents will be involved in this decision. But in his comments, he's sort of suggesting that actually there is that bit of tension between parent and child. And I think this is an issue that we're going to keep talking about, that's going to keep looming its head while we're waiting for a final decision on this issue.
Well, absolutely. And the Vaccines Minister, Nazim Zahawi, has said that if any 12 to 15-year-old wants to be vaccinated and is judged to be competent, then their wishes would override parental concerns. Does that shock you, Peter?
Well, it tells me that the thought only goes in one direction. I mean, what happens if 12 to 15-year-olds say that they don't want to get the vaccine? I mean, presumably, if you have the right to be able to overrule your parents who are trying to say no, well, what about the case where parents want you to have the vaccine and 12 to 15-year-olds decide that they don't want to do it? I think it opens, as Jasmine said, a big can of worms. One of those questions is about voting reform as well. If 12 and 15-year-olds are able to make decisions around their personal health care, around vaccines, but what about other areas that are highly sensitive around personal health, but also around participation in other areas? I mean, so what does competent, who defines it, and who's going to be deemed to be incompetent? So, I mean, it looks to me like a sort of a Saturday kitchen table decision that hasn't been thought through or joined up. And, that's not particularly reassuring to be trying to put a comment on. I mean, I understand the intents and the purposes of this are trying to make sure that more people get vaccinated. But that messaging, I'm afraid, is all over the shop here.
And Jasmine, the Metro are suggesting that vaccine passports are on their way, according to Nazim Zahawi again.
So it's quite an interesting one because when the notion of vaccine passports was floated earlier in the summer, it was in the context of the government being worried about uptake among the young, particularly the under 30s. And there was this hint that, maybe it was just a ploy to get the young people to take the jab. But the government seemed to be really sticking to this issue in spite of, the inevitable backbench pushback that they're going to receive from this. And the argument from the vaccine minister is that actually it makes business sense. They need to find a way in which businesses, especially nightclubs and sort of entertainment venues, venues or places where lots of people gather. We need to find ways of making sure that these businesses can operate in a COVID secure way. And so it does seem to make logical sense on the surface, but I think there are lots of questions about how this is going to be practically enforced, whether it's a case of people will need to show proof of having a jab or whether they need to show proof of a negative test or both. And so there are lots of questions surrounding this, and it's also unclear as to how far this policy will actually extend. So the focus at the moment is on nightclubs, but could it be sporting venues? It seems to be a little bit vague at the moment, and I think the government are really going to need to outline some details to the public and to backbenchers and to businesses to make it clear how this policy can be implemented on a practical day-to-day basis.